Hello all. Today again in a new chapter from the sessions. Today we are going to go through session 22, which seems a session that actually help us to understand a little bit why these kind of things are happening to us. It's like, I think it's too much today. The day is super hard, or my existence is so hard. And in the session is going to be a little bit clarify, is that so, or is actually not that so? Is maybe something that you program in yourself, or how this system works? Like everything that it happens to you, how that exactly comes? Even a little bit about the harvest as well. And yeah, just another session, another chapter, another Thursday on this beautiful planet Earth with souls that are connected together, trying to remember what we are doing, trying to help each other to build a better place maybe, or to enjoy our lives as well. So not saying more words, I will pass the word to Gabriel, who is actually the one who is going to introduce and learn more about, or teach us, as he says. He is like the kind of that shows what is in the material. It's just again his kind of understanding, like this material is just impression. Take what you need, what you think it resonates with you, what it's like feels not feeling well, or is like not really working. Put it on side and try and to apply this law of free will. So welcome to everyone again. Welcome to Gabriel, and I will leave you guys with him.
Gracias. Thank you, Tatiana. Beautiful introduction for our session 22. Yeah, we're moving down the line of Don's desire to move from the beginning of third density all the way to current era back in 1981, and which in this timeline it's pretty early, not early, pretty current and still updated, I would say. Even if it was 40 years, we're dealing with a an event that takes possibly hundreds of years. So yeah, let's dive into this without further ado. Um, I think we can cover all of this, and I don't think I have much commentary on again, history and those kind of events, but anything that stands out. I haven't read the session actually in years, so probably reread it while doing some work, but not like I'm going to do today. So we're going to start with the first question anyway, which there's a couple of questions about Carla, and I think it gives us a nice insight as to how the mind works and the impressions in the mind. So in the first question, Don says, it's actually a question from Carla. The instrument would like to ask a couple of questions of you. The instrument being Carla, of course. I'll get them out of the way first. The instrument would like to know why this or she smells the incense at various times during the day in various places. I think my assumption is correct that it's the incense that they would burn during the session that she was smelling. Much like you are, during the day, suddenly there's a lot of flower smells that sometimes we get, or somebody's perfume, right? And we say, like, where's that coming from? So something similar. Ra says the instrument or this instrument has spent a lifetime in dedication to service. This has brought this instrument to this nexus in space-time with the conscious and unconscious distortion towards service, with the further conscious distortion towards service by communication. So a couple of things here. One, her unconscious mind was already bent on service. Her conscious mind was already awakened towards service, and she was already acting in service through communication or channeling and the work that she had been doing for almost a decade at this point. They continue saying, each time, as you would put it, that we perform this working, our social memory, complex vibrational distortion meshes or unites, blends together more firmly with this instrument's unconscious distortions towards service. Thus, we are becoming a part of this instrument's vibratory complex and it a part of ours. So both Ross distortions and Carlos distortions, if you remove simply the idea that they are entities, just the tendencies, their harmonies, they were meshing together. This occurs upon the unconscious level, the level whereby the mind has gone down through the roots of consciousness, which you may call cosmic. This meshing is happening at the unconscious level. This instrument is not consciously aware of this slow changing of the meshing vibratory complex. However, as the dedication of both levels continues and the workings continue, there are signals sent from the unconscious in a symbolic manner. Because this instrument is extremely keen in its sense of smell, this association takes place unconsciously, and the thought form of this odor is witnessed by the entity. So that's why there is a sort of connection that we sometimes feel, and we're not consciously aware as to why, like anything else, that is happening at the unconscious level. So at the unconscious level, these things are connecting. Um, and yes, I think the biggest takeaway here is to know that where you bend your mind, where you dedicate your mind, that will start to mesh with your conscious mind. In other words, your conscious mind is a function of where you put your attention, period. So if we're bringing our attention inwardly, whichever way you want to bring it, then there's going to be a conditioning, I would say, right? Our conscious mind, the way we communicate, the way we behave, it's going to be more in line with that. Um, People start talking in different ways. Is that curious? People start behaving in different ways. So we could spend a good while here, but whatever our tendency is to move the conscious mind, particularly inward direction, then that will shape our minds. So I think this is a fascinating topic that, I mean, we can go on a tangent here, but just as a sort of, I don't know, a little hook for anybody that wants to continue talking about this. Second question, and it's second question from Carla. Don says, secondly, she would like to know why she feels more healthy now after she does these sessions. She's generally feeling more healthy as time goes on. Ron says, this is a function of the free will of the entity. This entity has, for many of your years, prayed a certain set of sound vibration complexes before opening to communication. Before the trance state was achieved, this prayer remained within the conscious portion of the mind complex and, though helpful, was not as effective as the consequence of this prayer, as you would call this vibrational sound complex, which then goes directly into the unconscious level, thus more critically affecting the communication from the spiritual complex. Also, this entity has begun, due to this working, to accept certain limitations which it placed upon itself in order to set the stage for services such as it now performs, which is the channel. This also is an aid to realigning the distortions of the physical complex with regard to pain. So all of this just to say that the more Carla dedicated herself to the service that she was here to provide, the more the body would align into harmony, I would say is the word. You, uh, I think there is a beginning idea, and I think it does happen on certain levels that the physical complex may heal, meaning that that which affects us goes away. But in general, the real healing is the disassociation with the body as something that is a burden. And again, this is another hook for anybody that wants to talk about this. But there is a huge, and I think this is just my perception, that the whole cycle of the archetypical mind and the body is related to this. Is related to this perception change in terms of how we perceive the body. It's an inner healing rather than depending on the physical transformation of the body, which is very gross and dense. That again can happen, but I don't feel that that's the point from which we're looking. So, Carla's health and evolution of body, that's that. Just think about it. Evolution of the body must be away from this perception of the body, right? It cannot remain on this. So it must move, perception must move to a higher perception, which again is disassociation with the body. Question 3. And now we move into the meat of the session. Don says, thank you. I'll ask a couple of questions to clear up the end of the second cycle, the second major cycle. And then we'll go on to the third and the last of the major cycles. Can you tell me the lifespan, the average lifespan at the end of the second major cycle? Ross says, by the end of the second major cycle, the lifespan was as you know it, with certain variations among geographically isolated peoples, more in harmony with intelligent energy and less bellicose. Don continues and says, can you tell me the length of that average span in years at the end of the second major cycle? Ross says the average is perhaps misleading. To be precise, many spend approximately 35 to 40 of your years in one incarnation, with the possibility not considered abnormal of a lifespan approaching 100 of your years. So a lot of changes from 900, 700, and then, or something to that effect, and then now to an average of 30 to 40 years. Question 5, Don says, then can you give me he pauses, can I assume then that this drastic drop from 700-year lifespan to one less than 100 years in length, during this second 25,000-year period was because of an intensification of a condition of lack of service to others? Is this correct? So basically, this drop was because there was a lack of service to others. Ross says, this is in part correct. By the end of the second cycle, the law of responsibility had begun to be effectuated by the increasing ability of entities to grasp those lessons which there are to be learned in this density. Thus, entities had discovered many ways to indicate a bellicose nature or war, not only as tribes or what you call nations, but in personal relationships, each with the other. The concept of barter having given way, in many cases, to the concept of money. Also, the concept of ownership having won ascendancy over the concept of non-ownership of an individual or group basis. Each entity then was offered many more subtle ways of demonstrating either service towards others or service to self, with the distortion of the manipulation of others. As each lesson was understood, those lessons of sharing, of giving, of receiving in free gratitude, each lesson could be rejected in practice. Without demonstrating the fruits of such learning teachings, the lifespan became greatly reduced, for the ways of honor duty were not being accepted. So all these possibilities were opened up, let's say, and they weren't taken as applications for growth, for interaction, for service. It's like we unlocked all these things and they were not being used in that direction. So interesting that there is a spiritual stigma around money, because the root of all evil is money. right? Anybody here had heard that? The root of all evil is money. Nobody heard that? Yes. Well, I'll offer a correction because it's often cited that way. It's the love for money. The love for money is the root of all evil. So money is not the issue. It's the love for money and not what money represents. Money represents simple energy exchange. That's it. And I love somebody who I got this from who said, money is like a magnifying glass. It'll magnify what you have inside. If you have poverty, it'll magnify that. Poverty mentality. If you have ambition, it'll definitely amplify that. If you have service, it'll amplify that, whatever your service is. So money is a neutral thing. We just didn't use it properly. We didn't know how to use it. And there was some manipulation, of course, and money system. So um, hierarchies and all these things. So that's why we associate money wrong. It's just because we have a mentality wrong around money. And that needs to change if we are to recover some sort of um, direction, like Ross says, move the needle in the right way. So another hook that we can send in the fishing tank today, in the fish of topics that we can continue on. Question 6, Don says, would this shortened lifespan help the entity in a way, or in any way, in that he would have more times in between incarnations to review his mistakes, or would this shortened lifespan hinder him? Pretty good question. Ross says both are correct. The shortening of the lifespan is a distortion of the law of one, which suggests that an entity not receive more experience in more intensity than it may bear. This is only in effect upon an individual level and does not hold sway over planetary or social complexes. Thus, the shortened lifespan is due to the necessity for removing an entity from the intensity of experience, which ensues when wisdom and love are, having been rejected, reflected back into the consciousness of the Creator without being accepted as part of the self. This then causing the entity to have the need for healing and for much evaluation of the incarnation. The incorrectness lies in the truth that, given appropriate circumstances, a much longer incarnation in your space-time continuum is very helpful for continuing this intensive work until conclusions have been reached through the catalytic process. So how much more we need experience depends on the lessons that we're here to learn, period. That's on a very individual level. But we're talking about an effect completely on the human being. In general, we were rejecting this, and so the lifespan was shortened or affected in the negative, meaning less time. But it's a balance, actually. It's not something bad, terrible on this side. It's just a balance. Um, Even on an individual level, we can see that when life just feels like I don't want to be here anymore, then your body will respond that way. So apply that collectively, and that's the effect. Question 7. Don says, you spoke of the South American group that was harvestable at the end of the second cycle. How long was their average lifespan at the end of the second cycle? Ross says this isolated group had achieved lifespan stretching upwards towards the 900-year lifespan appropriate to this density. So they retain, apparently, and it was an isolated group. So I'm not sure how the collective affected this. It's a good question. I don't have the answer for it. But yeah, we're talking about the end of the second major cycle, which was 25,000 years ago. And Ross suggests that this was still 900 years for this particular group. And if my understanding is correct, I'm not sure. I'm not sure of this one. I won't speculate. I think in the third major cycle is when South America became a huge population. Could be wrong, but that's what we seem to find so far in the ruins, and we're still discovering ruins there. Jungle is too alive to allow us to do that. Question 8. Don says, then I'm assuming the planetary action that we are experiencing now, which shortens, it seems, all lifespans here, was not strong enough at that time to affect them and shorten their lifespan regardless. Is this correct? Here's the answer. This is correct. It is well to remember that at the nexus in space-time, great isolation was possible. So, well, we're now connected through the internet, so we're even more connected to each other's distortions and mental proclivities. So that's the point. That seems to be the connection. Pretty interesting. I would never have guessed that. Question 9, Don says, about how many people populated the Earth totally at that time? That is, incarnated in the physical at any one time. Ra says, I am assuming that you intend to query regarding the number of incarnate mind, body, spirit complexes at the end of the major cycle. This number being approximately 340,000 entities. So that was the global population 25,000 years ago. Question 10, Don says, approximately how many were harvestable out of the total number? And this is where we get the first harvest by Ra. They say they were approximately 150 entities harvestable. Question 11, Don says, a very small number. Then, as the next cycle started, are these the entities then that stay to work on the planet? I don't know if they said elsewhere or where it is, but I think these are called the elder, not the elder race, right? I know there's a name for them other than the 150 entities as we see them now. So did they stay? Are those the ones that stay? And Ross says these entities were visited by the Confederation and became desirous of remaining in order to aid the planetary consciousness. This is correct. So just a reminder, when you're harvested or when there is a harvest in third density, that harvest goes to fourth density. But instead of moving to fourth density, there was a stronger pull to return to the third density experience on Earth to aid, which makes sense, at least in the positive direction, positive path. Question 12, Don says, what type of visit did the Confederation make to this group of 150 entities? Ross says, a light being appeared bearing that which may be called a shield of light. It spoke of the oneness and infinity of all creation and of those things which await those ready for harvest. It described in golden words the beauties of love as lived. It then allowed a telepathic linkage to progressively show those who were interested the plight of third density when seen as a planetary complex. It then left. So a sort of vision. I don't know if this happened. This must have, well, obviously it happened in time space, but was it in the discarnate state? I would think so. That's my thinking. Meaning, I don't think this was a vision that happened in space-time as they were incarnate here. Could be wrong. Question 13, Don says, and did all of these entities then decide to stay and help during the next 25,000 year cycle? Ross says this is correct. As a group, they stayed. There were those peripherally associated with this culture which did not stay. However, they were not able to be harvested either. And so, beginning at the very highest, shall we say, of the sub-octaves of their density, repeated this density. Many of those who have been of a loving nature are not wanderers, but those of this particular origin of second cycle. Okay. That's interesting. Let me reread this part. Those peripherally associated with this culture, which did not stay, they were not be able to be harvested either. So where did they go? I'm unsure about this one, to be honest. They were not able to be harvested either. And so beginning at the very highest of the suboctave, they had to repeat. So why did they say that they did not stay? I think I'm gonna have to leave this one for homework. All right, we'll pass it for now. What I understand here is that there was those who didn't achieve harvestable um, grade level, they were associated with those they did, and somehow they didn't stay or they did not stay, but they stayed because they repeated. That's what confuses me. So I don't know. We'll move on. Question 14, Don says, are all of these entities still with us in this cycle? And Ross says, the entities repeating the third density major cycle have, in some few cases, been able to leave. These entities have chosen to join their brothers and sisters, as you would call these entities. Yeah, this continues to confuse me if I don't figure out question 13. Maybe some of you clever people will do it for me so I can figure it out. Um, but I'll keep moving. Question 15. Don says, were any of these entities names that we would know from our historical past? Ah, our penchant for names. We want to know names. Um, Don continues says, that have appeared as incarnated beings we find in our history. Ross says, the one known as sound vibration complex, Saint Augustine, is of such nature. San Agustin. The one known as Saint Teresa of such a nature. The one known as Saint Francis of Assisi of such nature. These entities, being of monastic background, as you would call it, found incarnation in the same type of ambience appropriate for further learning. So it's interesting. Here's something that lends an insight as to, am I the same entity? Being of such a nature, as Ross says, is to me representing more that, yeah, they represented that vibration, that understanding, that message, that knowledge. So rather than being the entity itself, one of the 150, but rather that materialization of understanding within the planet, from this planet, which is a beautiful crystallized being from this planet. Question 16. Don says, well, then as the cycle terminated 25,000 years ago, what was the reaction of the Confederation to the lack of harvest? Ross says, we became concerned. 17. Don says, was any action taken immediately, or did you wait for a call? Ross says, the Council of Saturn acted only in allowing the entry into third density of other mind-body-spirit complexes of third density, not wanderers, but those who sought further third density experience. This was done randomly so that the free will would not be violated. So there was not yet a call. So I'm thinking this is at the beginning of the 25,000, the last 25,000 years. So yeah, 24,000 years ago. There was a welcoming of more third density entities from other planets, I would say. And this was random. So there was no violation of free will. I can only assume that if this was from a specific culture, then it might affect a little bit more. I'm not sure. I don't know how metaphysically this works, but That's sort of what they're suggesting, that it wasn't selected. So it was random. Random second density to third density, or third density repeaters, maybe. Who knows? Not wanderers. Those are not wanderers, by the way. Ra is very specific about wanderers. They are entities in full fourth, full fifth, full sixth density. Question 18. Don says, was the next action taken by the Confederation? Or yes, when a call occurred. Um, Ross says this is correct, and Don questions further and says, who or what group produced this call, and what action was taken by the Confederation? Ross says the calling was that of Atlanteans. This calling was for what you would call understanding with the distortion towards helping other selves. The action taken is that which you take part in at this time, the impression of information through channels, as you would call them. So the first communication or contact at this point, we're talking about the Atlanteans, the big civilization of old, we could say, 15,000 years ago or so, uh, more maybe. This was the first communication, which is telepathic through channels. It seems like they were very advanced in terms of just going inside and listening to the roots of the mind. So Don continues, question 20 says, was this first calling then at a time before Atlantis became technologically advanced? And so Ra says this is basically correct, because where else will we get this technology so fast? Don says, then did the technological advancement of Atlantis come because of this call? I am assuming the call was answered to bring them the law of one and the law of love as a distortion of the law of one. But did they also then get technological information that caused them to grow into such a highly technological society? In essence, if they were calling, they should have gotten the law of one and the law of love and so on, right? But was the technological information cause this growth to become this highly technological society? And Ross says, not at first. At about the same time as we first appear in the skies over Egypt and continuing thereafter, other entities of the Confederation appeared unto Atlanteans who had reached a level of philosophical understanding, shall we misuse this word, which was consonant with communication to encourage and inspire studies in the mystery of unity. However, requests being made for healing and other understandings information was past having to do with crystals and the building of pyramids as well as temples, as you would call them, which were associated with training. So I would add here, this is all neutral information that can help both ways, right? It's here are the tools. What are you going to use them for? And the intention is obviously uh, at the beginning, or that's the desire to encourage this seeking of mystery, of unity. I guess you can put it that way. Everybody, however unconscious they might be, however third density, I don't like that word so much. This is 3D stuff, like slapping a label on things we don't like. So everything here is moving in the direction. Some slow, some fast. Doesn't matter. Everything is moving in that direction. So when this philosophical understanding, I love that Ross says, shall we misuse this word? Understanding. Um, Once they got this philosophical understanding, then they were You were given this type of information. Oh, you want to know about the mystery of the universe? Seek unity. And so they were passed down this information, technology, basically, that can help him. So let's continue. Remember, this was all for training. Training on what? Training on accelerating this desire to know the mystery of unity. So Don says, question 22. Was this training the same type of initiatory training that was done with the Egyptians? Ra says this training was different in that the social complex was more, shall we say, sophisticated and less contradictory and barbarous in its ways of thinking. Therefore, the temples were temples of learning rather than the attempt being made to totally separate and put upon a pedestal the healers. So there was a little bit more harmony and maybe mixed um, desires here. And it highlights a little bit more the Egyptian culture and how quickly it degraded every time they got information that it was moving towards a understanding of unity. So question 23 then says, then were there what we would call priests trained in these temples? Ra says, you would not call them priests in the sense of celibacy, of obedience, and of poverty. That's the concept that we have for priests here. They were priests in the sense of those devoted to learning. That's a clarification of language there, if I ever saw one. Um, and a welcome one, too, because you see, here, I'm going to take the opportunity to share something. Nobody here would probably associate themselves with being a prophet. We've used that word so much that if it seems, wow, I'm not a prophet. Nobody's a prophet here. Who's the next prophet? The truth is that everybody here is a prophet because a prophet just means somebody who knows the message and conveys it. That's it. So everybody here is a prophet. We like the word now, light worker. That seems a little bit more modern. Same thing. Messenger, all these words, right? So that's the kind of correction or emphasis that Ra is saying here, not in the way that you know it, but rather in the simplicity of those who are devoted to learning. So everybody here is a priest too. There you go. They continue saying the difficulties became apparent as those trained in this learning began to attempt to use crystal powers for those things other than healing. Curious monkeys that we are, as they were involved not only with learning, but became involved with what you would call the governmental structure. Thank you, Atlanteans. So, question 24, Don says, was all of their information given to them in the way you are giving our information now, through an instrument such as this instrument? And Ra says, confessing, there were visitations from time to time, but none of importance in the, shall we say, historical passage of events in your space-time continuum. So there were some visitations. Question 25. Don says, was it necessary for them to have a unified social complex for these visitations to occur? What conditions were, I'm saying, what conditions were necessary for these visitations to occur? What were the conditions for these visitations? Good question. I know that in the back of his mind, he was saying like, we're getting visitations now, so what's the requirement? Ross says the conditions were two. The calling of a group of people whose square overcame the integrated resistance of those unwilling to search or learn. So some mathematics here, which I won't do, but the exponential um, will that grows towards asking information in such a way that will allow visitation was greater, right? You don't need the majority of people here. It's just a exponential amount of people or an amount of people that exponentially increases over the individual ones that resist that type of calling. And I think it's Stephen Greer or something. I just remember this from the LNL retreat last year. They there's a sort of uh, what's it called? Methodology or something that they use to see like uh, some kind of events. I'm not sure. I was never involved in UFOs and that type of seeking, but there is something that people have tried and it works. Or so it is said. Still a mystery. The second requirement, the relative naivety of members of the Confederation who felt that direct transfer of information would necessarily be as helpful for Atlanteans as it had been for Confederation entities. So this is the naivety that was present not only in Ra, but maybe in others that said, well, if it worked for us, it should work for them, right? It's given. And this is I think, the perennial mistake, not a mistake, um, the perennial disappointment of expectations. Whenever there is this deep desire to serve, and so we sort of we can't help ourselves. We want to help others, and so we intervene. Intervention always mixes something, stirs the pots. So that was the thing. Information, technology given that was helpful to others now just creates a different effect. I'm not going to say this wasn't beneficial. From a certain perspective, it wasn't, because for those who want growth and evolution of a spirit and all that stuff, then wasn't too helpful. For those who try to help and obviously wanted that result, they were kind of disappointed. But in the perspective of the grand scheme of things, it's all good. It's all well. It's more experience. Now, that's something that invites us to kind of reflect. Is my suffering real? The truth is, no, only from the perspective of your character, which you are welcome to embody and dramatize and so on. But in the grand scheme of things, it isn't. There is no mistake, as Ross said. There is just disappointment of expectations. So have no expectations. What kind of life would that look like? Terrible? Not quite. Investigate it. Try it out. No expectations. You'll be surprised every single day. I think we're up to 26. 26. A couple more questions and we're done. Don says, I see then. What you're saying is that these naive Confederation entities, you, Ra, had the same thing happen to them in the past. So they were doing the same thing for Atlantean entities. Is this correct? And I just love this work. Ross says, this is correct. We remind you that we are one of those naive members of the Confederation and are still attempting to recoup the damage for which we feel responsibility. I wouldn't call it a damage. I would call it an impact. An impact. It's a little bit more neutral. Damage seems always pejorative. So, so you're saying these naive Confederation entities, oh, hold on, we remind you that we're one of them. So I continue and say, it is our duty as well as honor to continue with your peoples. Therefore, until all traces of the distortions of our teach learnings have been embraced by their opposite distortions and balance achieved. Fascinating thing that when you get involved, well, now you're mixed in. That's not a bad thing. They never said it's like, oh my God, we did this and now we have to stay with you guys. No, it's just service is not fully implemented. So you are you're bound to the entities as you do this. Which again, I don't mean to give the impression that it's a bad thing. It's just what happens. You're committed. You're committed to what you began. And it's actually a joy to actually see it resolve. Question 27. Don says, I see. Then I will state the picture I have now of Atlantis, and you can tell me if I'm correct. We have a condition where a large enough number of the entities of Atlantis had started at least going in the direction of the law of one and living the law of one for their call to be heard by the Confederation. This call was heard because, using the law of squares, it overrode the opposition of the Atlantean entities that were not calling. The Confederation then used channels such as we use now for communication and also made contact directly. But this turned out to be a mistake because it was perverted by some of the entities of Atlantis. Is this correct? Can I take a moment to praise Don here for, I mean, you're listening to me talk, which um, I'm doing my best to read everything coherently and in one shot and everything. But Don was sitting there for an hour, listening to a very slow pace, monotone speech. And he was absorbing everything. Like that's impressive. So love and light for Don, please. So pretty good summary, I would say. Amazing summary. Ra says, this is correct with one exception. There is only one law. That is the law of one. Other so-called laws are distortions of this law, some of them primal and most important for progress to be understood. However, it is well that each so-called law, which we also call way, be understood as a distortion rather than a law. There is no multiplicity to the law of one. This will be the final question in length of this working. Please ask it now. Um, we have one more to cover, but here's Ra's sometimes returning to center and correction of language, which may seem something trivial, minuscule, nuance maybe, but it's important to keep that in mind because then we think, I would say, we are governed by different laws. And so we split again. In our minds, we split. Remember, we gotta do this and we gotta do that and we gotta love and we gotta too many laws. Let's keep it simple. One law. Law is one. What does that mean to you? Well, that's what makes up your life. Could go more out. And also for those, I don't think they use it too much, but for those nerds of the law of one, you'll see that they'll use way instead of law sometimes. I don't know why they just didn't keep the word law for the law of one, but they kept using it interchangeably. So if you hear or read the way of love, then you know that's the same thing as the law of love or for density. Last question. Don says, what was the, he pauses and says, the only question I was going to ask that I can think of was, could you give me the average lifespan of the Atlantean population? And Ra says the average lifespan, as we have said, is misleading. The Atlanteans were, in the early part of their cultural experience, used to lifespans from 70 to 140 years. This being, of course, approximate. Due to the increasing desire for power, the lifetime decreased rapidly in the later stages of this civilization, and thus the healing and rejuvenating information was requested. So that's it. 70 to 140 years. That is the lifespan of 20,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, something like that. Um, and they started, for what I gather, they started losing some lifetime because of the desire for power, the love for power. And they requested rejuvenating information. Not sure how that looked like. But that's all I got for this session. Pretty quick. And let's open it up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for the ones who also join later. Um, yeah, like Lucas, you mentioned that about the Atlantean thing, and then we were touching again this topic today. There was like some parts I got a little bit confused, and that was exactly so. When the Confederation reaches out, like our others on planet Earth were the simultaneously with the Atlanteans and the Egyptians, right? So some of them were in Atlantis and some of them were in the Egyptian area. What I was wondering somehow is like how with that highly grade of somehow uh, learning and remembering and exploring and trying to be reachable, why those two civilizations couldn't connect each other, you know? When you have this highly uh, somehow understanding of how life works, and you have this telepathic, and you can somehow transmute matter and do this kind of connect with everything at once. How those two civilizations were not reached, and I know that of course the ones from the Ra conscious oh my God, I'm losing the words. Those from Ra were on the Egyptian area, and those from Atlantis, I don't know which kind of the confederation was called for. If they communicate each other in order to make a similar process. So I was wondering why is this information was not asking for, like it's also somehow important if we are all of us are together and all of us are experience these changes on life. So why is not like mentioned that at the same time was happening this and they were able to communicate and to see the like the evolution of both civilizations somehow. And we see again at the end that the information was passed from the Confederation, of course, was always in a good way to help to heal their process, and it got again misunderstanding, and um, one of the element that is always missing is time. So you started to lose time on Earth, and that was they were not living 140 years, but they were living then possibly 70 years. So kind of similarities between both civilizations that might be on the same time.
Yeah, all you can see here is that um, as we as we move from a primitive consciousness, talking about third density beginnings, and we begin to understand what reality is, because that's all we're doing. That's all that's happening. There is an understanding of what reality is, and of course, what the self is. When that understanding passes through the lens of the human mind, it can go both ways, always. And that is a negative direction and a positive direction. So I'm not sure if the Atlanteans and the Egyptians communicated. I don't know if they were
Yes.
isolated.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if it's mentioned here. I particularly don't mix other books and other things because the result is always I kind of mishmash that I don't, it, with me, it doesn't ever resonate. There's always discrepancies and differences and so on. But that's not to say that if that's what it was, then it just doesn't convince me. So I don't know if they communicate or not, but I can see reflected regardless of the source of the information that that's what it is. We gain this understanding and then technology is a result of that because we want to accelerate this. So it's almost like we request service from higher information. That higher information filters through as what we call technology. And just like I said, money is a sort of primitive technology. It amplifies that which is within, and that which is within is forming, it's coming out. So whatever desires we had were amplified with technology, not money in this case, but uh, power. So if you had all the power in the world, what would you do? It's amplifying your own desires. And the desires of human beings can be moved in both directions. It just happens that through this third density and this physical body and the experience of planet Earth, there's a high tendency towards bellicose action and war and fighting and just territorialism and so on. And that's just the way it is. So, um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's my view.
Thank you for expanding a bit about this. So, Anne, do you want to mention what you want to say?
Yeah, yeah. It is my understanding that Atlantean civilization is before the Egyptian civilization when Ra helped the Egyptians. They're not happening at the same time. Can
Again,
you hear me?
based on the, yeah, yeah. I was actually just looking because I think in this session they did mention that at some point they visit Egypt. So again, based on Ra, and I need to double check, but I think they existed at the same time. Um, I don't know
They
what level of advancement they had in, maybe Atlanteans were a little bit more advanced, but um, yeah, I think they did exist at the same time.
there
Could
are
be wrong.
people in Egypt at the same time, but the great civilization that we know as the culture resonant we know of ancient Egypt is after the Atlantean. That's my understanding. Actually, LNL webpage has a timeline of, we can check on that to see.
Yeah, not that
Yeah.
I'm saying, yeah, that's true. There is like a line span time where all these important times of the civilization are marked on. Just I'm just taking for this session what for me uh was like kind of do they were though in the same time or not? Something that we can also see is that several times the humble messengers Ra are expressing that please correct ourselves about time because they cannot really be 100% assured since this is something that it just work here like in this density or in this planet. So um sure is nothing, at least not with time. uh but it, like you start to try to put some pieces in your jigsaw and try to find out like what it makes more congruence with yourself. So that was some of the things that are out there. But thank you so much, Luen. I'm going to check the resources on the Netherlands research um, to clarify my mind a bit. Thank you so much. Is there anyone that wants to ask something for the session to continue like the queries with Gabriel? Or like to talk us something special from this session, or even like you were raising today some how do you say that? to fishing, like you were
Hook.
mentioning, yes, to some hooks there, if we can say that. Do you mind to repeat them again? Do you remember those, Gabriel?
Uh,
Money
Not
and the
really.
other one?
Money is money and interest here. The stigma around money.
And the other one was? Do you remember that?
I don't. It doesn't come up from the roots of my mind.
It was at the beginning of the session. I just remember you said another one at the beginning of the session. But curiously, we were talking yesterday in one of the meditations we started now here in Europe about money, how money help us or split us to service, to do service. What is service when you want to really do service? If you are, for example, helping someone and then you are waiting something in exchange, or you are giving your money and then you are waiting for receive more money just because you were so openly and you were just giving your money. And if I give this my money so openly, money will come to me. And then it's again really to think a little bit about it. So yeah, money is a tool, but as soon as you program the tool will work. So I see nowadays like money more than it helps us somehow to go through some difficulties that we our souls program. Uh, and when somehow you love a little bit money, but not in the way like like this egoistic love, but more like that unconditional love that moves everything. And like when you put this kind of energy, or do you can this kind of how do you say it? Um, yeah, some like is there, I can work with it, but it's not is I'm working for it. I'm working to have more. I'm working just in the sake to achieve more and more and more. It just is there and it helps me through my process. So it's something that somehow is still here and now in the ages of cryptocurrencies. I'm not that well in that topic, but it's another way to see monetary changes.
Yeah. I think that it depends on the impact that you want to have. Um, those are tools. And one of my things that I've recognized over the past years is that I meet so many people who have a beautiful thing to offer to the world. And there is I mean, generally, we just don't think we're worth it. Well, the biggest things of people, and curiously, in the law of one, wanderers suffer from this thing of unworthiness. It's not a surprise that then those who are here to help, to provide their service, they suffer from great unworthiness, and that is value. So if we think we are worthless, then our value is just to be, and it's a misleading, terrible misleading of what true humility is. It has nothing to do with money. Absolutely nothing. And so there's a sort of ego pride that comes from, I'm humble. I have, I keep things this way. It has nothing to do with that. So there is a relationship between how we feel unworthy ourselves. Our service suffers because of it. And again, just like I said in this session, I don't think there's anything that is terrible. Like I look, I don't know, 100 million wonders, and they're not actively doing their service. That's fine. Their presence is enough. That's all we care. You don't have to do this. But for those who feel a call, there's a lot of suffering because I don't want to keep doing what I do. I want to do something greater for the world. And unworthiness is going to keep us there. It's just, and I'm speaking from experience. I'm not talking about anybody else. My own experience. Yeah, just, nobody cares about this. There's so many people that do this already. Why would I even try? So many things that our subconscious mind has been programmed to remain little because that's somehow better. And it isn't. It's not even worse either. It's just that's our choice. And we need to be aware of that. So that's one of the things. I think it's the only important thing that I see around money in terms of spiritual stigma that we're perpetuating needlessly because it'll allow us, if that's our direction, it allows us to serve a lot more people. If that's our direction, like I said, I am a firm believer here, and this shakes people's morality and values and so on. But I'm a firm believer that we are not here. Nobody's here to save the world. This world is doomed. Everything will collapse. Everything will die. Everything will just
Hey,
be blown
hey,
to smithereens.
don't.
Seriously, no hope. Stop hope. Throw hope into the trash. Hope is a weak version of faith. It's a helpful one. Hope is expectation. And I said no expectation. So that's my belief. It's not even a belief. It's a truth. Everything will collapse. So whatever we do is how we feel about ourselves and others. That's really what matters. So the question is, how do I feel? How do you feel? I'm great. Fantastic. Let's return the smile. But if you're suffering, if there is something going on in there, then you may want to go deeper because that's the only thing that matters. And whether that is, living in a shack, in the mountain and you're happy, then great. But maybe that's not meant for you. Maybe there's something in you that wants to come out. Are you listening? Are you really listening? Or is there a repeat? Are there many loops in your mind that keep repeating the same thing and they're not nice? They're just not nice and we know it. Somehow we just keep carrying them. But again, it's a choice.
Yeah, it's an individual choice, and everyone can just see it a little bit different. Today, Gabriel was presenting his idea, his level of understanding. Um, Again, just remember that this is an open talk, and we are just expressing our opinions. Here is nothing like the one true, that anyone here has the only one true. Like what everyone has here is the free will, and that's like our little beautiful treasure. So use it with your all senses. So I think we are going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much, everyone. See you next Thursday, same hour, same channel, possibly same or new people. You are always welcome. And for the ones who wants to recheck this information, is always able on the YouTube channel, and even in our Telegram group is the video uploaded almost 2 or 3 days before the next session. So you are welcome to check it again. Thank you for everyone. Thank you, Gabriel. If you want to add something else, it's your time. If not, we will see us anyway next week again.
I'm good for today. Thank you for making this space possible, Kat and Daniel.